This is the homework helper for the workbook for the 7th grade, Chapter 9, Section 5, Area of Circles. So as you recall from the note presentation, we're using the formula pi r squared here, or pi times the radius squared, to find the area of the circle. And as we look at question 1, that's great, because what they gave us is indeed the radius. So I'm going to just dump numbers into the formula and solve here. Pi, 3.14, times the radius squared, 6 squared in this case. Well, that's the same as 3.14 times 36. 3.14 times 36 is going to yield my solution, which is 113.04. And that's going to be meters squared, and of course you can round accordingly, 113.0 meters squared. Number 2 will use the same formula, but number 2 is the diameter instead of the radius. So you've got to make sure you take time to account for the fact that this is the diameter. And the way you do that is you cut that number in half. So I'm going to go ahead and take that 8 and cut it in half, which is going to give me my radius here, just half, which is 4. Well, now that I have the radius, now I can dump numbers into the formula and solve. So I'm going to take pi, 3.14, and multiply that by the radius squared, 4 squared. That's the same as 3.14 times 16. So we've got 3.14 times 16 here, which yields a solution of 50.24. And that's going to be feet squared. And you'll use that same approach here in solving some of these other questions. As you can see, in 3 and 5 and 6 and 9, you're given the radius. So you're going to solve that like you did number 1. In questions 4 and 7 and 8, you're given the diameter. So you're going to solve that like 2 by cutting the radius in half before you dump numbers into the formula. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the bottom here. Number 10, a Susan B. Anthony dollar coin has a diameter of 26.50 millimeters. What is the area of the coin to the nearest hundredth? So even though this is a word problem, it's just me using the formula. So I'm taking pi, 3.14, and multiplying it by the radius, whatever that ends up being, squared. Now, as you can see, looking at the question here, it says the diameter is 26.5 millimeters. Well, that's the diameter. I've got to cut that in half for the radius, as you just saw me do in question 2 a minute ago. So I'm going to go ahead and take and chop that number in half for my radius, and that's 13.25. So this is 3.14 times 13.25 squared. Well, we can solve that. That's easy. 3.14 times 13.25 squared. Order of operations, do that squaring first, then grab the 3.14, and that's going to be 551.26625, and that's going to be millimeters squared, rounding to the nearest hundredth as the directions asked yields 551.27 millimeters squared. All right, finally we'll take a look at question 12. It says use a centimeter ruler to measure the radius of the circle, then find the area of the shaded region. Use 3.14 for pi and round to the nearest tenth. So as you can see, that dark shaded area there is a quarter of the circle. So I'm going to work the question like I'm finding the entire area, but then I'm going to divide by 4 when I'm done, because that will give me a quarter of the circle. If you don't like that and you're hearing me say quarter of and you're not saying why isn't he multiplying, well then feel free once you find the solution to multiply by 1/4. As you know by now, multiplying by 1/4 is the same as dividing by 4. Take the dividing by 4, write it as a fraction, flip the second fraction, change it to multiplication. It's the same thing. You know that already. So I'm going to go ahead and measure here. I'm measuring here with the centimeter ruler again. And I'm just going to measure what we have here because there's nothing here that needs me to measure across. I don't have to figure out where the midpoint is. They've already done that for me here. So as I measure this out here, it looks like it's about 2 centimeters long. So we're going to go with a radius of 2 here. All right, so 3.14 pi times the radius squared, which is 2 squared. Well, that's of course the same as 3.14 times 4, which yields 12.56. All right, now, since this again is only a quarter of the circle that's shaded, Now I'm going to take and divide by 4, or multiply by 1/4. And that's going to tell me what percent of the shaded region represented there in the circle. So when I take that 12.56 and divide by 4, I come back to 3.14. So there's approximately 3.14 centimeters squared, or square centimeters, of the circle shaded. Again, it's just using that formula in almost every single problem. Pi times the radius squared.